So let's take a really quick look at what I call unholy alliances. So starting with the alliance between pharmaceutical companies and psychiatrists, I know what you're all thinking. A place where you can it's a place where you can get a diagnosis and corresponding medication sometimes within minutes. And are there some good physicians that are speaking out against this? There are. They're just a little bit harder to find. So what about the alliance between pharmaceutical companies and medical doctors? There are many good GPs, but they are medical doctors. Why are they diagnosing and prescribing for mental health issues? There is rising concern over those diagnoses, with some saying they are 50% incomplete or completely wrong. So it begs the question if MDs should legally be allowed to diagnose and prescribe for mental health issues. It is no shock to anyone that this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, though who appears to have very little concern about our health or even whether we live or die in some cases. So should it be surprising, really, that the only solution that we can come up with for addiction, which is largely viewed as a trauma symptom, is to give them free drugs? Wow. Now, British Columbia recently authorized the provision of safer supply fentanyl to use across the province, regardless of if parents are informed of or agree to that measure. So again, standing directly between parents and their children, leaving them with absolutely no say, trying to deal with the fallout that happens in homes, families, communities from addiction itself. More trauma. It really has been openly written about that the safe supply drugs are being sold on the street for stronger drugs. And then they are ending up at our teen parties and in our schools. The answer to that seems to be, well, we'll just give them for free. But then, pharmaceutical drugs, are a multi-billion-dollar business. What is surprising, though, is that Purdue Pharmaceuticals was charged and pled guilty to 3 felony counts for its role in the creation of the opioid crisis. Now our government is actually giving it free to our youth. Child pornography and trafficking, the largest crime focus and also a multi-billion-dollar business. Yet we continue, against the majority of parents' wishes, to expose our children to early sexualization and explicit materials. The expansion of MAIDs is an interesting one, although it seems to be put on the back burner a little bit. It has not been taken off the table. So the obvious direction is we're going to get all this, fixed up and, worked out, and then we're going to push it through. In fact, that's pretty much what I heard someone say. So, but it's an interesting one, considering that with MAIDs, there is also a rise in organ transplant. Doctors in Canada, where medical assistance in dying or MAIDs was decriminalized in 2016, performed almost half of the world's organ transplants after MAID in the years up to and including 2021. I am just going to find that article for you. Okay, so Canada leads world in organ donations from euthanasia. I was rather proud to learn that Canadian patients who receive medical assistance in dying have been given the opportunity to make something morally significant out of their death by opting to give life through organs to other patients. There's a lot of people that are highly, concerned about this. Because, I got to tell you, there is, right now there's a lot of ethical issues, around this whole thing. Okay, so Canada performing more organ transplants from MAID donors than any country in the world. So BC, as was a leader of organ donations, they said with the work and success of BC Transplant. Oh my gosh, BC Transplant is even holding seminars on how to donate your organs when choosing MAIDs. Organ donation from MAIDs, is on the uprise. I couldn't, I kind of help but feel that feels to me like some form of aggressive marketing for this. I was not comfortable with that. So, and kind of, you know, sort of felt similar to, the pushing of fentanyl and other drugs. So we've all seen the documentaries and the article. At least I hope that we have. But here's something I wanted to point out. With this interview, here it says, they're being, I was rather proud that Canada's done so well in terms of organ donation by MAID patients. Okay. So I say good on us. Like this is, really talks about patting ourselves on the back, for this kind of thing. It's unbelievable. Then you have, as we go down a little bit further, you'll find that what they did was they actually said, well, we did 44% of MAIDs took place at home, and just how really wonderful they are. And then they were transported by ambulance to a nearby hospital. And then he said, with a lot of help from paramedics in the fire department, and we were able to facilitate that. But there is variation among countries on how to do this and what medications to use. So in fact, Canada is currently updating its protocol, now submitted for publication to the Canadian Medical Association Journal, and it'll be shared with other countries, considering expanding assisted dying and organ transplant. Now, he did talk just briefly. He said about the ethics, and he said, we would never say, hey, do you want MAID? And hey, do you want to be an organ donor? It's not ethical. Okay. No. Well, perhaps they could just expand MAIDs and increase the availability to those with mental health issues, and maybe throw in the consideration of children into the mix as well. According to the Business Wire, the market size for organ transplant industry is expected to reach $23.6 billion by 2027. Frightening, right? 10% of all organ transplants are from illegal trafficking of human organs, and generates about 1.5 billion each year from roughly 12,000 illegal transplants. Children are especially at risk for exploitation. Sex. Oh, there is one doctor, by the way, an anesthesiologist who actually, put the hospital, working at a transplant clinic, put the hospital on notice that she and her team would not take part in surgeries where transplants came from MAIDS patients. She found that the ethics of that was just too questionable. And of course, she had some very solid reasons as to why, she wasn't going to do it. I'm just going to share my screen again. I have a great deal of luck with this, but I'm trying. So here we go. Oh my gosh, I got that the first time. So here's what she says about this. The inevitable intertwining of the choice for MAID and decision to donate means that any participant in the subsequent transplant process has the potential both to validate and promote MAID. Okay, and they're saying, it's not logical if you're accepting, from victims of suicide and homicide. But she says, however, there are crucial differences between those scenarios. No one is motivated to proceed with suicide or homicide because of the subsequent opportunity to donate organs. And as a physician, we actively strive to prevent both suicide and homicide whenever possible, rather than facilitate death as is done with MAIDs. And so this anesthesiologist said, I have recently informed my department that I am not willing to be involved in the transplant of organs from donors who have undergone MAID. And so they are just waiting to hear, sort of what the outcome of that is going to be. So we do have some ethical people out there, folks, who are saying, yeah, I'm not going to touch that. I'm not going to take part in that. So a lot of controversy over this. So sex reassignment surgery, the market size was worth more than US 623 million in 2022 and is expected to decline substantially due to the growing prevalence of gender dysphoria and awareness of sex change surgery. If you haven't got the point yet, folks, if you haven't got the point to this yet, I don't know what to say. This is truly not good. So it appears our children are very valuable commodities and can be trafficked in many more ways than one. I have heard maids referred to as everything from compassion to serial murder. Sex reassignment as defending our children or mutilating them for money. Pedophilia, pornography, child trafficking as just another sexual preference to the most deviant, sick, reprehensible crime committed. Free drugs to children as saving them to, even the drug addicts are having a good laugh over this one. Tell me, which is the truth and which is the amazing talent for brainwashing and marketing? I can tell you that I see the ugly fallout of these and more every day, and not being able to tell the truth from a lie is contributing to people's poor mental health. Medical doctors who diagnose mental health and prescribe accordingly, teachers who push transgender ideology and sex education, governments who give children drugs, public libraries containing sexually graphic material, all of them alienating children from parents. Tell me, is there anybody in this country who actually stays in their own lane? Again, a little history might explain some of this, starting with some current, more current history in our society. So more recent history, we have governments who have initiated government regulated on certain industries like gambling and casinos, alcohol, cannabis, lottery, and so on. I have never seen this stop someone from losing their home or life savings to a gambling addiction or prevent alcoholism. So I'm wondering where the regulated part comes in. Surely government regulated doesn't just mean we get our cut of the profits. When it was exposed that the liberal government in BC was either fully aware or complicit in money laundering from real estate and casinos, I waited for what seemed like forever to hear who was going to go to prison for this or who was going to be held accountable for this. I really knew what the answer was going to be with Hope Springs Eternal, right? It must have taken 2 years or more before the media reported that when it came to charges or jail time, well, no can do. That was the answer. Now, if we take history back just a little bit further, most people have heard of MK Ultra, where the CIA conducted trauma-based mind control experiments on their own people. But really, we see it as a problem in the US. Well, it wasn't just the US. It happened right here in Canada, and there are hundreds, even thousands of victims or survivors. So during the Cold War, Nazis were brought into the country through rat lines. The Canadian government, along with the US, the UK, and Australia, were complicit in giving them safe haven and new identities. Many of these were Himmler's SS. Now, Himmler's SS, just in case you don't know, were occult trained and familiar with Mengele's work with trauma-based behavioral modification, among other things. Some of the reports claimed at least 70 scientists and roughly 3,000 to 5,000 Nazi war criminals. One article referred to them as the dregs of the SS. This information, along with radio interviews, articles, CDC documentaries, including deliberate destruction of war criminal files, they can all be found in the CDC archives. So, according to survivors, these Nazis were laundered in laundered actually in positions in universities and hospitals, but they were also laundered in military bases. There were 3 defense lines of military bases across Canada that were built as a result of apparent or perceived threat from Russia. These were NORAD and Canadian run radar military bases. So many survivors of trauma-based behavioral control experimentation were showing up as adults, having been children on those military bases or the town directly or adjacent, to the base itself. At one point, there was even a convention held for survivors in Ontario, and the abuse they suffered went beyond imagination or explanation, and many were left deeply damaged. Some had degrees and were high functioning people, but they really, quite frankly, weren't the norm. I am going to show you a lot of people tried to get it actually shut down. So they had a tough time actually getting that convention going, but they also had a radio article of the convention. You can also, and they said that they had, they were surprised by the amount of people, the amount of survivors that had actually shown up that were survivors from the military bases, and that's how they started making the connection between the two. And there's actually a copy of the radio interview done stating that. We also, have, if you want to, this is actually, I'm going to explain this one to you in just a moment. So you can look up the radio interview with Lynn Moss-Sharman, who was responsible for holding that convention at the time, and how many came in. They started to have to look at the NORAD military bases because so many survivors actually of the abuse popped out at that particular time. So the convention was for ritual abuse, mind control, that type of thing, and there was far more than they expected showed up from those military bases. So now the CIA claimed that they had stopped those experiments in 1973. Most of the military bases were torn down 10 years later after building them. Now, I believe it was 1996, the Jewish human rights organization, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, hired American Nazi hunter Steve Ronbaum to come to Canada and root out Nazi war criminals. Ronbaum entered here. They had given him originally, he entered with only Canadian phone books. He started with 1,000 names. He knocked on the doors of those he could locate, drew out their confessions relatively easily, and then until he had amassed 58 confessions from Nazi collaborators living in Canada. So, they spoke of Hitler's final solution, the roles they played in murdering Jews, and so on. Now, these came through actually a rat line in Halifax. The U.S. had to admit to the financing of the experimentation that had happened in the U.S. due to Freedom of Information requests producing something in the vicinity of 20,000 overlooked files. Rest of the files had been destroyed on the order of the head of the CIA. Canada has never really taken responsibility for its part in allowing Nazi collaborators in the country and has denied that experimentation on children took place. This many survivors from various parts of the country with the same story can't all be lying, especially in light of the fact that the military bases were American Canadian run. It happened in the U.S., and Nazi war criminals, it seems, are not hiding in Canada. They actually live freely among us. Now, if you go into the CBC archives, you can actually find about the rat lines. You can listen to the radio interviews that happened at that time from various people, and you can read about Steve Ronbaum and what he discovered when he came to Canada as well. I suggest at that CBC archives, you can actually check that one out. So since the Cold War, here's what we're seeing. So since that, we've seen one crisis after another. It's been acid rain, terrorism, SARS, swine flu, AIDS, H1N1, 9/11, Y2K, threats of war, ozone depletion, climate change, COVID. The sky is falling. The sky is falling. This has been a consistent driving affair since the Cold War. Suddenly, with COVID, things are treated differently. It was reported, to be more of a risk to our elderly or to those with comorbid illness. That is nothing new for any virus we have experienced. It bears almost no risk whatsoever to children. Look, I am not minimizing people who got quite ill from it. I'm wondering why a virus with a reported 97% recovery rate and an average age of death of 83 is being presented and promoted like the Black Plague or the bubonic plague. The population, was completely and totally driven by terror. People lost their businesses and didn't know how they were going to pay their mortgages. Population, was literally in a mess. Suicide reports climbed. Police were answering as many as, like it's just in one detachment, as many as 15 mental health calls weekly or more. Well, if there are roughly 1,500 across BC and every one of them was experiencing that volume, well, you can do the math yourself. Children were bedwetting and reduced to baby talk. Families were separated. Elderly died alone. Drug overdoses soared, and so much more as we watch communities completely shut down and completely shredded. They traumatized the entire population. Again, most of it, notwithstanding some children, was old trauma, not new. So this was all on top of interpersonal trauma, family breakdown, sexual abuse, and every other adverse event, that can cause traumatic reaction. Unfortunately, trauma does not go away just because the threat does. People don't feel safe just because someone tells them to. And then they took and eliminated absolutely anything that could be healing for them. Either someone knows everything there is to know about trauma or they don't know anything at all. Given our history, I suspect they know, everything there is to know about trauma. If they know nothing about trauma, they unwittingly traumatize a global population of people. We still have people, sitting on pins and needles because that nervous system is hypervigilant. It's turned on. So if they utilize the knowledge they gain from trauma-based experimentation, then we have to start asking the question of why did they do that? If they know everything about trauma, is the endless DSM orders and MAIDs for those suffering mental struggles just a way of sweeping the evidence of what they've done under the rug? Because if anyone is going to try to tell me that they don't know that what they're doing is wrong, I'm sorry. I for one, am not buying it. Either we have not considered the destruction it's causing, or we're willfully blind to it. Well, let's take an answer to this question. Just throw out, if we continue in this trajectory, what are the possibilities? What are the perspective if we continue on this road with what we know? Maybe a few more questions and so on, but possibilities. So we have repeatedly heard from leaders about a new world order. We hear it from U.S. presidents, the UN, WEF, WHO. We've heard this from our own PM. In order for that to be accomplished, the old world order must collapse. The more we drive people with fear, the more they seek safety. The more safety can become a carrot that can be held up to promote peace and safety. The more chaos and division caused, the more those that desire this can step forward as the savior of humanity. When you continually demoralize and dehumanize a population, the result is that they become incapable of making a moral decision at all. For example, we suddenly started to identify every single person who has an opinion with a political party, as if they've got an umbilical cord attached to some kind of political party. Please, folks, we got to stop doing that. And I'll tell you why. People are not political parties. We are destroying personal autonomy and individuality with that. It's promoting division. It would be easy for someone to step in and say, well, obviously political parties are causing a problem. We will fix that. How about a one world government? Everyone would be on the same page and it will resolve all this awful division. They won't say they caused it. They're just going to step in and or could. Um, how about, well, there are so many policies that are causing problems. We'll have a one world order where everyone follows the same policies. That would include banking, education, medical field, everything. This will bring peace and safety and we'll be your saviors. Religious differences causing division. Well, we'll mandate a one world religion. Everyone must comply. That'll cure the problem, right? It will be promoted as a utopia, but it will be a great deception, the biggest lie ever perpetrated on humans. Many will buy into it because they're terrified and driven to seek safety. The cognitive part of the brain is not accessible. Fear is in control. It would be the same thing as a parent whose child wants to transition. They're against it. And suddenly, they get on board. This parent gets on board to support it. If they are confronted with their decision, you are likely to receive a very angry, assaultive response, even if it's not violent, because you are now stepping between them and their perceived safety, which is driven by the terror of losing their child. Okay? It'll be just like that. So this is not a one world government. It is one world control of everyone. All freedom will be lost, autonomy gone. People will be told how to raise their children, where they go to school, what you can do with your money, how and where you can shop, whether or not you can buy a house or car, what to think and what not to think, etc. But what is the biggest problem with this concept? It will mean the complete loss of humanity. The very qualities that make us human will be gone. Love, loyalty, honesty, kindness, compassion, truth, individuality, honor, dignity, our cognitive abilities to choose and to accept or change outcomes, service to others, meaningful relationships, courage, and more. Because when everyone is thinking the same, no one is thinking at all. When everyone is traumatized, they are driven by fear and the need to seek safety. This will override everything, including their cognitive thinking. It is not possible to learn to love others when everyone is the same. It is not possible to develop any of those qualities mentioned. It is our differences that teach us to love others. This is a system of automatons that do as they're told. As I stated before, that I did not believe in mental illness the way it has been sold to us. However, I do believe in insanity. But I believe it is a term that is relegated almost exclusively to the incurably evil. This type of proposed system is usually promoted by those who do not possess those basic human qualities. They have no capacity for love. They are cowardly, immature. They view others with contempt. They care for no one except themselves. They are dishonorable. They are cruel. They do not possess kindness or compassion. They lie pathologically, and they do not feel remorse or have a capacity for repentance. In essence, they lack goodness. It is the darkest, most hollow, and meaningless of existences. Jordan Peterson once said, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, it's not word for word, that most people he had treated with complex trauma or PTSD, it was caused by running face first into an overwhelming evil. I was really surprised to hear him say that because I have said exactly the same thing, but I've never really had somebody else point that out. Excuse me. These people are motivated entirely by greed, envy, power, and control, and a very misplaced sense of entitlement. I mean, they think what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine as well. Now, do they need what you have? No, they just can't stand you having it. So if you think that a system created by such people is the answer, please reconsider that thought. This is a death culture. People still believe this will bring, people will believe this will bring some form of safety, and it may even seem that way initially, but will only last a short time until people are suitably comfortable. So it will abruptly end in short order because greed must have it all. It will settle for nothing less. Soon enough, expectations to turn in anyone who opposes it, even if it's your own mother, and that meant life in prison or death. Far too many will do it and honestly believe they're doing God's will. Or should they decide the earth is overpopulated and therefore many must die? Or perhaps maids will become mandatory. Someone else will decide if you're worthy to live or die. Perhaps you're eating too much, or too old, depressed, or you have an opinion of your own. If you think it's a stretch, you're not paying attention. Understand that evil cannot be anything but what it is, evil. It has its own brand of genius, and it is never satisfied. So what's to be done about the direction that we could possibly be heading in? Well, it won't be easy, but the alternative is actually so frightening that I would think we would be willing to fight the good fight. A recent video showed Klaus Schwab being concerned that there are people who don't want to fix the system, they want to destroy it. Well, people get to that point when they realize that there's nothing in the system worth saving. They don't want to destroy systems, they want to destroy this system. I truly believe it will start in families and communities. Look, the concept of Canada, if this is a vast country, this is kind of overwhelming for people. But it will only take one that stands up and says, we will decide what's acceptable in our communities and what is not. Go and speak to your neighbors and your allies, hold community information sessions, set up your community boards of people, pull your children out of the current education system, create your own, establishing what your children will be subject to and what they will not. Let those in support of old systems go elsewhere, but learn to start saying, not in this community or not. Say no, stand your ground, and take control. In so doing, you will extricate from the current system and also the head of the beast and be everything that they are not. It is as relevant what we are fighting for as it is what we are fighting against. Many Christians are involved in leading the charge, against this outrage. I'm not interested in getting into debates with you about organized religion and Christian. You know the difference. The bottom line is, it is because they hold to a set of values or principles that are higher than our governing bodies. And when those two stand in opposition to each other, they must stand with their God-given values. So whether they trip and fall, make mistakes, sin or don't is immaterial. It's what they're grounded in that matters. It is about the strength of their commitment to their core beliefs. I once read an article that said surveys show that if given the opportunity, most people would rank themselves good people. This is usually because people can and do make comparisons. My neighbor down the street is obnoxious and does terrible things. I don't do those things, so therefore I am a good person. Clearly, it feels good to rank ourselves as good people. But society has changed, and the yardstick by which we judge ourselves good for many is now made up of whether or not we can justify evil by calling it good. This allows someone who would convince another person to kill themselves to score themselves as the highest of humanitarians. If that person was given a mirror that reflected who they truly were and what they had become, they likely would not live through that experience. Everyone has their part to play. Some are informing, some are exposing, some are taking action, but everyone must be active in saying no. We all must be willing to reach out to others, especially find something this week that you know is going to make somebody's life easier, that you can help out with. Start knitting those communities back together, with the very things that unite us. Eh, with everyone having their part to play, but everyone also must be willing to reach out to others, to create alternatives for our youth, to visit the lonely, to help our neighbors, whatever it takes. So my daughter has this expression when I get angry and about to say something out of anger, she'll say, yeah, Mom, don't throw that one out into the universe. Just believing in what is good is not enough. We must be willing to stand on the very things that unite us as brother and sister, and it must come out in our behavior, starting with our communities, or it is of no value. Evil can only be fought with good, and only if that good is strong enough to push it back. So please be cognizant of what you're throwing out into the universe. And thank you so much for joining me.